Welcome back to another edition of Burn the Talking Points. We're so glad that you're joining us. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Number one, we have a brand new store at store.mddems.org. We put some new stuff up the other day, so shop for t-shirts. Before summer, we have sweatshirts, we have cups, we have magnets, we have bumper stickers, we have pins, we got everything. So make sure you go to store.mddems.org and you can get some stuff for this summer. Also, make sure that you are hitting that subscribe button or smashing that subscribe button, as the kids say, or follow button wherever you're watching it. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon, wherever you are. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment in there. Let us know what you want to see for another episode. We'd love to hear feedback. We get a lot of emails. Feel free to start dropping it in the comments. It's a little more centralized for us. But I am very, very enthused. I use excited a lot, but today I'm enthused about today's conversation. This is going to be a back and forth where we have folks that are both wanting the same goal, but might look at it slightly differently. And we are going to talk with two of our DNC members and talk about what DNC members are, and how we move the Democratic Party forward and how we move the DNC forward, because we're all coming at this from a place of love. So this conversation, you might hear differing opinions. We're going to try and find some common ground. But at the end of the day, what we can say is we're all Democrats. We're all committed to the DNC being the best it can possibly be. And all we want to do is everything we can to make sure Democrats win up and down the ballot. So this is the time where we have growing pains. We lost the presidential. We need to have those big conversations as a party about how do we make sure we win in 26, 28, and beyond. And those conversations can be difficult. They can be uncomfortable, but the Democratic Party hosts those conversations. We're going to talk about what we need to do because we're not scared of having difficult conversations. But what I do know is our guest today may come at it from a different way, but in November of 26, when there's a Democrat on the ballot, they will both be pouring their sweat, blood, tears, everything, resources into making sure every Democrat is elected. And so our two guests today are DNC members Robbie Leonard and Leong-Hong. I'm going to let you guys explain what a DNC member is a little bit. So if you guys can start just with 30 seconds each, a little bit of your background so folks know where you're coming from, because you're both elected, and what it is DNC members do and don't do for our audience, because it is our system, which we'll talk about, is a bit confusing. Robbie, do you want to start?
I want to defer to Belle.
No, you start. You start.
Okay. So Belle and I are going to have different answers on what is a DNC member, what they do. Belle's a superstar. I don't know if you know this, but if you go to a DNC meeting in any city that hosts us across this country, everybody knows who Belle is. I'm a fly on the wall. So Belle and I, we were both elected by the Central Committee members of Maryland. So every county has a local Democratic Central Committee. They come together as the Maryland Democratic Party, the state party, and they vote. We have 4 members that are voted in by the Central Committee. It's Belle, myself, Cheryl Landis, and Bob Kressline are our current DNC members. So I was voted in, I think, in 2020. So I'm now in my second term. Belle, I want to turn it over to you really quick, and then I want to get back in and I want to talk about our DNC meetings. And we just had an election a few months ago. I think it was in January, where we just voted in a new chair of the party. It was Jamie Harrison. Now we have Ken Martin. So I want to take over after you tell us about yourself, Belle.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leong-Hong. I have been in the DNC since 2001. I was actually an at-large appointed member by then Chairman McAuliffe. And I've been serving there since then. I first became an elected member from Maryland in 2016 when a position became available. And by the way, this is a very coveted position in most state Democratic parties. And so you basically have to wait until there's a vacancy for you to be able to run for election. And I said, in 2020, when you ran, I think we had a couple of vacancies. And so that's
Greg Pecoraro decided to step down.
And so there's only a possibility of running for election when there is a vacancy. I was lucky enough that the chairs since McAuliffe, every one of them reappointed me as an at-large member. one thing that I have been doing at the DNC since, I would say, 2005. In 2005, I decided to run for election within the DNC as the AAPI caucus chair. And what that means is that the caucuses in the DNC, and I can go a little bit later after you speak, Robbie, about a little bit of the structure of the DNC, because that might be of interest to the
That is of interest. I'm interested in it.
Okay, great.
So I mean, just
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
just so folks can kind of get the context, this is party insiders. You may not look at yourself as an insider. You may look at yourself as an insider, but these are the folks, when people say party insiders, these are the people who are literally elected to help run the party. Now,
I just heard someone booing me as you said. I hear in the audience, they're like throwing tomatoes. I mean, that's
so Robbie Leonard, party insider.
Yeah.
But so like Ken Martin is the chair. He runs the day-to-day. He's elected by the DNC members. We have vice chairs, which we're going to get into. We have caucuses, those types of things. But when it comes to voting on things that the DNC does or doesn't do, these couple hundred members are the folks that have the vote, not elected officials, not the general public. You all are the ones that make decisions about what the DNC does and doesn't do. So Robbie, I know I want to get into one of the things I think is on people's minds first, and it might come around with like party structure, and it might actually go into that. So let's talk what's been in the news first, and that's been what happened with David Hogg. I don't want to talk necessarily about David Hogg, whether he's irrelevant to this as a person. I want to talk some of the structure. So what happened was David Hogg made an announcement that he was going to primary ineffective Democrats and had $20 million from his PAC to do that. Now, David Hogg was also elected as a vice chairman of the DNC. And so this was a vice chairman doing that. Where it gets super confusing, and for the audience, David Hogg was eventually removed from his position, but there were two things going on at once.
No, he was not removed.
You're right. He was not removed. The Credentials Committee said how he was elected, the election itself was invalidated because it did not follow technical rules, and he would have to run again for his position. He chose not to run again. Is that a fair way to put it?
That is a much fairer way to put it.
And so there's a conflation right now between David Hogg's pronouncement that he wants to primary ineffective Democrats and sitting Democrats with his removal. Those two things may or may not be connected depending on who you ask. But for the technical feature, they are disconnected.
And I think already, if you asked Belle, she would say they're not related. If you asked me, I would say they are related.
Well, let's ask Belle. Would you say they're disconnected or connected?
What, that he stepped down?
Yeah.
Well, no, that he was removed, or that he's no longer there.
I don't think it's fair to say that he was removed, because actually when he made that announcement, that was back in about March timeframe, right? And there were a lot of discussions about how that was inappropriate. And let me talk to the point of inappropriateness there.
Yeah.
I think the fact that as elected officials of the DNC, they have certain responsibilities, and neutrality is central to that. And what that means is that during a contested election, a contested primary, Democratic primary, you don't want number one, you don't want an elected officer of the DNC to put a thumb in the scale on any particular race. That's first. That's why you don't get involved in a Democratic primary. Secondly, because he is or he was an elected vice chair, he also had visibility on all the data, okay, that the DNC collects. And so if he is acting on the basis of that data, then that is unfair, right? And that is at the basis of the unfairness of an elected officer putting a thumb in the scale and breaching the neutrality pledge that we all have. I have a pledge of neutrality, yes, you know, and so from that perspective, it is important that when there is a primary between Democratic candidates, that the elected officials don't say, I am for this person, because by saying that, you automatically give advantage to that candidate.
So there were two separate issues. One was how the vote went down when we voted for the DNC officers.
Right.
For those at home, we have gender balance elections for officers.
Which I want to get into a question of should we have gender balance, but let's skip past that now and get there soon.
And we have that in the state party as well. And so because there was a non-binary candidate, it changed how we were supposed to calculate the vote and this and that. So on one side, one of the female candidates for vice chair cast a challenge. She made a petition
in February, I believe.
In February,
and this was before David Hogg made the announcement. By the way,
so
that's why the two issues are different.
And this is where I'm going to bring them back to. So you're saying they're disconnected because she made her challenge before David Hogg announced that he wanted to primary sleepy, ineffective incumbents, but we voted after he made his announcement. We're all human.
No, we didn't. What do you mean?
We voted to redo the election.
The Credentials Committee voted.
The Credentials
Committee voted.
Okay.
And we, as DNC members, voted if we wanted to go along with the Credential Report. So when the Credentials Committee met and they heard Kaylin Free's petition, her complaint, they were split 50-50 at the Credentials Committee.
Okay.
And then they had to rethink it, and then they came to the decision to support her challenge to redo it. I believe that someone had to have in their mind, well, David Hogg is kind of problematic. That might influence me.
Yeah.
So you're saying a little bit.
So, may I interrupt for a minute?
You may interrupt whenever
you want. Thank you. I will. And this is where he likes to.
Belle, you are in charge.
I am on the Credentials Committee, so I can tell you what happened. Okay, the challenge was brought up on the basis that there was irregularity, if you will, in the election, in the process. And it's actually in the counting process. Okay. What happened was that on February 1st, when we had the election, by the time we got to the third vice chair position counting, and this was, as you probably may remember that, it was about 12 and a half hours.
Yeah, it was a very long day.
There was a chair in the, and I won't name the delegation, that stood up and said to the chairman, Mr. Chairman, I want you to, I move that we suspend the rules. Okay, and suspending the rules at that point, then started going back, and then whatever happened in the counting of the election is where the challenge came in. It was a numerical. And let me point out something. At the Credential Committee, there were two sets of lawyers speaking. The female candidate that the challenge, that put the challenge, is Kaylin Free. I think that's very well known.
Yes.
The Kenyatta did not have a lawyer, but David Hogg did.
Okay.
One of the points that David Hogg's lawyer made to begin with in his opening remarks is that this challenge is not about David Hogg.
Yeah.
It is about the process.
Got it.
So it was recognized by both David Hogg's party and the Kaylin Free's party that it was a process issue.
Right.
And that's what was he saying.
So right before we all voted as DNC members on whether we were going to go along with the Credentials Committee to redo the entire election, it was reported, there were DNC members that were interviewed that said there was just a leaked phone call with Ken Martin and David Hogg, and there were 10 members on this phone call that was leaked. And I think David Hogg leaked it, and I'm less likely now to support him because we all have emotions.
That was afterwards.
That
was afterwards. Timing was afterwards.
Let's
after our vote.
Right.
Yeah.
Folks will be able to look up the timing on that. But let's move past the individual because we could talk about David Hogg all day. But let's actually talk about the issue at hand that is where I'm going to use the word kerfuffle started. Was this announcement that a DNC officer should wants to, can, should play a role in primarying, quote, ineffective Dems. Robbie, you and I had a conversation not in front of cameras on this. Ignore the person, just the concept. Where do you stand on the concept? Should the DNC be active in primarying ineffective members of the party?
Should the DNC...
Or a DNC officer be allowed to, I guess.
Should the DNC support incumbents in a primary election? I mean, because I think that's what we do. I think the Democratic Party supports incumbents. And I think if we support incumbents, that's putting our finger on the scale as well of a primary. I think primaries are good. I think challenges within our own party are good. When we look at 2020, Joe Biden came out. I mean, we had 2 debate stages of candidates who ran in 2020, from Bernie Sanders to Tulsi Gabbard. Remember, she was a Democrat.
I do remember that.
But these were the choices that, we have a big tent, as we like to say. And so we gave our voters choices. They battled it out. Kamala Harris and Joe were going at it on stage. Joe came out the winner, and he kicked Donald Trump's butt in that November. We can win hard primaries and win general elections. Donald Trump did that in 2016, right? So I think it's important. And honestly, the one question that I had for every DNC candidate for office who called me, whether it was Ben Wickler or Ken Martin,
the calls didn't stop.
One of the 50 people running for vice chair.
Just so folks know, how many calls do you think you got between December and January when the elections happened? Because there was all the candidates for chair, but also vice chair and vice chair for this and secretary and everything.
I'm just lucky I have unlimited minutes on my cell phone plan. Okay. I was spending all day talking to people, but I would ask all of them. I would talk to them about this past election and whether Joe Biden got out too late, if we shouldn't have got out, whether we should have had a primary. And I wanted to hear what their thoughts were, because looking back on it, I do think that if we had a big primary with real debates, that the people could have seen us on stage talking about the issues that the American voters care about.
Pre-Joe Biden debate or post? Like after he dropped out, wanted a big primary, or like
pre? I mean, I think Joe Biden should have been a one-term president, and I think that a year or two earlier, we should have been talking about having a primary debate schedule. Just imagine having a senator or a congressperson or a mayor of a city getting up on stage and saying, you know what, things were really bad under Trump, but my constituents are telling me things aren't great for them right now, and this is what we could be doing differently. I think in the last election, a lot of people looked at the Democrats and thought that we weren't listening to their concerns, whether it was inflation or Gaza or whatever the issue was. We had to run on Joe Biden was great. He did nothing wrong. Kamala is going to be exactly the same, no different. Trump's bad. Remember that. So I think that if we had a contested primary, people would have at least heard us talking about the issues that were important to them.
Yeah. I want to hop on to that for a minute. I think this goes into last election, right? There are a lot of things that could have, should have, right? A lot of things that we probably could have done differently.
I mean, hindsight's 2020, and
hindsight is
the difference between what genius and idiot is, like 1% or something.
Truly. And I think the one thing that I regret most is the fact that we didn't reach out to a lot of people. And we didn't reach out to people and I'll talk about my own community, right? Most of you know that I'm very passionate about the API community. That's where I kind of, that's my lane. That's where I focus. But then I expand to, the rest of the universe. But my community, in a lot of cases, were not touched. Yeah, sure. We were touched in the battleground states. But was enough done? Like, for example, did we have translated material? Were we able to go out and knock on door with people, knowing, who we needed to talk to in what language, and sending out the appropriate people to talk to the people? The question that I always ask when somebody says, well, how about doing this policy? I said, okay, will my grandmother understand that? Right? will my grandmother and my mother that doesn't speak any English, will they understand what you're saying? Will my auntie understand what you're saying, even though she may be speaking, may be able to speak English? Will my cousin be able to understand you? If we Democrats keep on talking at this level, and we don't bring it down to the issues that matter to us day to day, we're not gonna be able to win, right? By all accounts, by every single account that I can think of, this past the Biden-Harris administration did so much good, so many wonderful policies, and so many great programs that help people. But yet the people didn't know that this was what was happening, right? In some cases, you talk to a shopkeeper and they think, oh, this is, because the previous president did it. No, that's not what happened. And so if I have to explain to the shopkeeper, to my mother, to my auntie, to my cousin, that the difference between what they were getting, before under Biden-Harris, and they're thinking that, no, this was from the previous administration, then we're doing something wrong.
So what happens if you feel like you have a congressperson, a senator, a delegate in the House of Delegates who you think is doing a poor job reaching out to your community or enacting policies that are contrary to their interests? Do you think they should be challenged?
I would talk to the congressman. Okay, and I would try to explain, because in many cases, they don't know what our issues are. Okay, what I think may not be as important as what that congressperson or that senator is really thinking, and until I have that conversation, I can't move on it. But I think one of the things that we don't do so well is we don't communicate enough. We don't talk to the people in the language they understand. And this has been something that I've been saying to anybody that would listen to me.
I think it's interesting, too, the difference between maybe like what you're saying, Robbie, not knowing and so being informed of it versus not caring.
Yeah.
And is there a difference between challenging a sitting incumbent who doesn't know versus doesn't care? Do they get a chance to prove they can figure it out? I don't know. That's a question. But it's also, the line then becomes DNC member versus not DNC member, or DNC officer versus not DNC officer. That's where this line gets very murky. And also, like, who's to decide whether they're ineffective or not? That's where I bumped a lot. Like, the David Hogg conversation is incredibly fascinating. I feel like I probably sit on one side and it might be different than some other folks, which is okay. But I ran into who gets to determine what ineffective is, because ineffective to me is very different than other folks consider ineffective. So, like, Robbie, how do you wrestle with that idea of, like, should they get to be the arbiters of ineffective or not? Or,
well, they're the ones that are starting an organization and attack and mobilizing people. So if, David Hogg is leading the group and it's called Leaders We Deserve, send your PAC donation to them. David Hogg and the people who are donating there and that he's mobilizing, they can have their own platform and decide what are the issues that are important to them. There's a million interest groups out there. So when we talk about, does an elected official know or care about your issue? They probably do. And they probably are hearing from another group on a different side who have a different opinion. And they're making a decision on who to support, and so I think a lot of times, when we talk about different groups, ethnicities, demographics that we are forgetting about or need to appeal to, I think very oftentimes we know where young people are on issues. We know we need young people, but we constantly ignore young people's desires. So I think that's, something that David Hogg, he's wrestling with himself. It's, do I want to be a DNC officer where I'm doing nothing different, or am I going to engage in an activity that's going to inspire young people to come out to vote, that Democrats are fighting for the issues that you care about.
Yeah. And my guess, Belle, you hearing Robbie, you still definitely bump on the neutrality part. Like a DNC officer should be neutral.
Yes, absolutely.
Would it change your mind if, let's say, again, not David Hogg, could be anyone, could be, Joe Schmo from Texas, if they put out a platform that said, this is what I determine as ineffective, and it's a rubric, and if a person meets it, like X amount of town halls, X amount of, dollars raised, X amount of votes missed, and they were just going off a rubric, would that change your mind? Or would it still be neutrality of neutrality?
Let me make a point. The point is that I actually admire David Hogg.
Yeah.
Okay. What I don't admire is that he's using that he is a DNC officer and wanting to put the thumb in the scale. David Hogg, as the chairman of his PAC, can do whatever he wants, as long as he's not doing it while he is a DNC officer.
So do you think...
So, Robbie, like, for example, if you were to start a PAC, okay, and you decided to go and help all the indigenous people in the world, I said, Robbie, that's fantastic. Go do it. But you're not affecting, you're not putting your reputation as an officer of the DNC at stake, because you don't want to put any doubt. Okay,
it's causing an issue to make people trust the larger.
It's the trust issue.
So after 2020, and this is called burn the talking points. Joe's got his talking points. I'm gonna
burn the talking points.
But Belle, after 2020, when Joe Biden won the election, the DNC, us as voting members, we voted to change the primary calendar.
Yeah.
We changed it to put South Carolina first, this state that took Joe Biden across the finish line, essentially, when he struggled in the first two states. And we did that to reward Joe Biden and make it easier for him to win a second term.
Well, not really. The rationale for putting South Carolina first back then was because if you look at the primary calendar, before that, you had New Hampshire, you had Iowa. Small states, lily white states. It doesn't
and screwed up the app.
We
have to be honest. Iowa definitely screwed up the voting app. Can we just?
Yeah, I mean,
sorry to my friends in Iowa, but that was a bad app.
This goes back to my.
But it wasn't. But it wasn't a reward issue. I mean, did he express a special interest in it? Probably, but I wasn't in the decision room for that one.
So what do you think should be for this next cycle? So for 2028, I heard Jim Clyburn say South Carolina doesn't need to be first, but as long as it's one of the first four is what he said. What do you guys think the calendar should look like?
Maryland first.
Obviously, with Maryland number one, but then
Maryland
let's talk about 2, 3, 4. I mean, Maryland would be a great first state.
Yeah, of course. I think that we should still retain however those first four is.
So Nevada,
I think it's
Iowa,
important for us to retain that kind of mix.
Are those the four? South Carolina, New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada. Those four.
Yeah, okay. I'm fine with that.
Just the order doesn't matter to you, but those
to me it doesn't matter.
And Maryland. Robbie, what do you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
I mean, it's
great conversation.
I mean, to be honest, that one didn't really. I said, whatever.
Well, all right, let's talk about what the party can and can't do and what you think its effectiveness can be. And this doesn't necessarily relate to the DNC. It probably relates more to like the DSCC or the D-Trip. But one of the things that we found a lot of success, especially in like 2012, 2014, 2016, was helping great general election candidates make it to the general election and preventing really poor general election candidates from making it. They might be great primary candidates. What's your take on the powers that be? We'll just say whether it's the DNC, DS, D-Trip, but for this instance, we're talking about the DNC or quote the establishment, helping to make sure that the strongest general election candidate makes it there. So, like, we would not have had the Senate in 2012 if that action didn't happen. We're talking about, Missouri. We're talking about Indiana. We're talking about North Dakota, those types of things. So how do you balance greater good versus like process purity? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, it almost sounds like you're saying, which candidate should we support in the primary?
Not necessarily.
You just did. You said which one's going to do best in the general. That's who we should support.
But I think that's only in very specific cases. All right, let me ask this question. Are there cases in which it does make sense to support folks in a primary?
Yes. Next question. Yeah. No, I mean,
like, how do you divide that line? This is where it gets tricky. There's everything with the DNC, in my opinion, is a gray area. There is no clear, like, 100% here, 100% here. But
I'll just give you my own personal experience.
Please.
Okay. You talked about earlier, you said 1% is the difference between a genius and a loser, let's say.
Yeah.
In the last...
That's an idiot, yeah.
I'm one of those, what you call a perennial candidate. I've run 3 times before. I've lost every time. The last 2 times I've lost elections, I got 49% of the vote. Okay, so
you run one more time and you get the 51%.
No, I'm permanently retired. I'm
too old now. We need to let the next generation. You just said you're a perennial candidate.
No, every candidate's retired until that race
might be watching this podcast, honey. I'm retired. No, but I got 49% in a primary challenging an incumbent who was a 16-year incumbent that had never had a primary challenge since he was elected. Everyone thought I was crazy. They didn't think it was possible. And I got 49%. It was winning on election night, the next few days of mail-in ballots, and then he caught up. In 2018, I ran for state senate in one of those drive for 5 races where Larry Hogan and the Republican Party were going to flip 5 Democratic seats. I got 49% running against a delegate who put in $400,000 of his own money. And again, 49% winning election night, winning the next couple of days of mail-in ballots. In both of those races, people told me I was going to lose and it's impossible to win a general election. I'm too progressive or too left for the district. And those were people who either were in Annapolis or Washington, D.C., who had no idea about my district. They didn't know the people that I spent 18 months going door to door talking to and what was important to them. They just looked at spreadsheets and charts of past elections and thought that they knew what was best. So the party or the DCCC or whoever didn't invest in me because they thought I was out of touch with my district, but they didn't know. So I don't think that we always have the smartest people in the room making those decisions. I think sometimes we need to be bolder in looking at the candidates that are truly speaking to the audience that they're supposed to, right? And it shouldn't be just checking all the boxes that someone who may have been in office for 30 years thinks it takes to win.
Yeah. I think that a common wisdom from this past few elections is that the consultant class, which is what you're talking about, right, has an extraordinary amount of influence in some of these decisions. And the D-TRIP, the DS, and the DNC are no exception to those influences. I think that if you remember, I mean, I know that you were bombarded just like I was during the 2 months running up to the election of the chair, that every single candidate for chair promised that they would do away with that. Okay, and I think under Chairman Martin, that is being done. It is, and they are reviewing everything. I don't know for sure. I'm not in the back.
There's definitely a lot more moving in this too.
But I think that they are making those changes, and you're absolutely right. It is that consultant class that exerted extraordinary amount of influence. That in your case, they were influencing the DLCC. I think in the case of the the legislative elections, right? To not invest in you because they put their money on somebody else that they thought was better.
So
it's sad. But unfortunately, it's true.
All right. So I feel like, man, we're finding common ground against me.
See, we're finding.
No, this is great. Let me ask this question, which, God willing, we take the White House back in 2028.
Yes.
Typically, the president picks the head of the DNC.
Yep.
This is something I've been thinking a lot about because of 2024. Do you think that's a good practice that we should continue that as the DNC and defer to the president to select?
We don't have a choice.
Why not?
When we have the White House, the president is the head of the party.
But
Okay.
but that's the thing, is you're all elected by the people of Maryland.
Yeah.
Does that not? I mean,
No. The White House will control the party.
but didn't that lead directly to the issues of 2024?
That's what happened in 2024.
Robbie?
Yeah, I think Jamie Harrison has said numerous times that he wishes he wasn't a rubber stamp for the White House.
Tom Perez had a lot more leeway.
I mean, Ken Martin has a lot more leeway right now, too.
Yeah, because they could make decisions without, the titular head of the party telling them what to do. And it isn't the president himself that does that, It is the political arm.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like we voted for the chair of the party, and then we voted for a first vice chair, and then we voted for this vice chair. And when we voted, we weren't. We heard the leaked tape of Ken Martin talking about how difficult it's been with David Hogg, and David Hogg creating the problems for Ken, and Ken even thinking about quitting the party because of it. But we voted for vice chair too. So like Ken, we could have a process where the chair chooses his vice chairs to make sure he's got people that are
all the choices that when we have the White House chooses the whole slate of officers.
Who knows? I don't know what's best.
No, that's what happened.
Right.
Yeah, I'm asking, is that
what happened.
best? Is it? It sounds like it is what it is.
It is what it is. I don't think that there's what is that adage? I can't even remember who says it. Have the wisdom to know what you cannot change. Change the whatever the. Well, I manage to mangle every single saying, so you say it right.
It does seem like the party may need some internal.
I'm one of the 417 DNC members, or however many there are right now, and I feel like my only role within the party is to cast those votes, and it will always be reflective on what I think my constituents believe. It's the people who voted me in, and it's going to come from bottom up. So if I get a chance to make reforms, I'm always going to vote.
I want to end with a game, but I have another question because I know we have a hard stop for pretty much everyone here. My question is, and maybe we cut this, but I hope not. Has the party become, quote unquote, too woke? And I'm using that word because that's what is being labeled by us. But let me give you a few examples. We still do gender balance.
Yeah.
We open the DNC with a land acknowledgement, which maybe that's the right thing. Maybe it's not. But what I think we've seen in a lot of popular culture is that doesn't come with any action. I've never seen any action attached to a land acknowledgement. It feels performative. Is the party too woke in our operations?
So, Bell, you're shaking your head no. And I hate
disagreeing over the last 45 minutes.
Bell and I are going to be on the opposite side where I'm on the too woke side. I can't believe I'm taking the too woke position.
I can't believe you're doing that either.
No, Robbie. But I don't look. Oh my God, this is going to go viral. Robbie Leonard.
Robbie Leonard is saying that this is good.
No, look. Bell, you do so much for the party, and you do so much for the DNC and with the AAPI, and I honestly envy what you get to do. My vote is I get one vote for vice chair, I get one vote for this, but I just bought tickets to go to Minnesota for our next DNC meeting in August. I spent $600 some for my hotel, a couple $100 to fly there, and the whole weekend there's nothing for me to do. There's no caucus that I'm in. I'm not in the Black Caucus, the AAPI, the LGBT, the seniors, the women's, right? So there's whole days of meetings for different groups, and there's nothing for the middle-aged straight white guy. And this is my worst problem in life, okay? My life's pretty good. These are white guy problems. But
it speaks to the bigger...
But within the party, I mean, I can't go a day without going online and reading about we're losing white young men, right? And I've told every person, you won't even give me a meeting to go to at a DNC meeting.
Well, okay.
But that's a fact. You can argue with it or whatever.
I'll argue with you on that. I will argue with you on that, okay? And I also, one of the things that happened in this last executive committee meeting is, and I think the Chair Martin is going to be announcing that at our August meeting, is that he's actually going to be forming 4 task forces, right? One of them is going to be on communications. I'm going to mangle it all out because I don't remember every single one of them, but one of them is branding, one of them is communications and branding, one of them is activism, outreach, and, so...
He'll announce them.
They'll be announced. So, in other words, if you're not on a committee right now, on a standing committee, you can go do task force. But even today, there are councils that you can attend, council meetings that you can attend. There are labor councils. There are, you're not old enough to be senior yet, but there is rural.
I think that's proving the point.
Not old enough to be senior. Too old to be young. I'm not. I'm not a veteran. But there are issues that you care about, right? That you can go and work with. So there are groups that you can join and then you can attend. They are not necessarily in the standing committee. And by the way, all standing committee meetings are open. Yeah. And you can always participate. The only thing you cannot do is vote.
And I think what I'm hearing, just because we're getting on time, is this is a great conversation where I'm hearing Robbie express a little bit something around like feeling that there is a place without it being explicitly named as a place. It may be. Yeah. And Bell saying there is, but the experience versus the technical might just not be lining up.
I just want to contribute and help our party. I want a place where I can contribute.
I'm going to grab you and take you with me to my AAPI committee.
Listen,
come join.
Wait till one of your AAPI lunches, and I loved it.
Well, so let's end with a game here.
One of the things I do is that whenever I have a meeting, I bring food. That's what
it is true. It is true. You are one of the best chairs and caucus chairs there is. But we're going to end with a bit of a game. But I do, just before we play the game, want to say thank you both to Bell and to Robbie. This was probably the most interesting, sorry to all past guests, animated conversations we've had, because it's clear there's there's a multitude of different paths forward for the DNC and a lot of feelings about which way we should go. And it's because everyone cares so deeply about winning, because when we win and when Democrats win, we can do good things for people. And when Republicans are in power, we see them cut Medicaid, we see them cut food assistance, we see them, do tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. And that's not what we are as a party. And so the passion you're hearing and seeing is because we want to win, and how we win is the question. And I think we're going to have several more months of these conversations before we're all locked in for 26. So we're going to play a game, though, called
Before you do that, I want to say one last thing to close us out, and that's to say that it is extremely important, extremely, extremely important for all Democrats to unite.
Agreed.
No matter what our differences are.
Yes.
In the final analysis, we want to win, and the only way we can do it is if we're united.
100%.
I love you, Bell.
Yeah, we need to. We have the fights now, so we're united when it's time to vote and get our candidates across the finish line. So we're going to play a game called Endorsement Madness. You guys made the terrible decision to run for office for some reason, and so pretend you are a candidate and you're getting endorsements from everywhere, and you have to accept one of the endorsements. 2 people come to you and say, "I want to endorse you," and you only get to accept one. I'm going to line 2 people up, and you have to tell me which endorsement you take. You don't get to think. You just have to answer. We're going to go Bell first and then Robbie and keep switching off. All right, Bell. Barack Obama, Michelle Obama. Which endorsement do you take?
Michelle.
Robbie?
Barack.
All right. Going to you first, Robbie. Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. Gotta answer.
Tulsi Gabbard.
Bell?
Can I say neither?
No, you gotta pick.
Oh, Lord.
Breaking news, DNC member pick K. RFK. All right, next one. Bell, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton.
Hillary.
Hillary.
Interesting. I thought you picked the other, but Robbie, Bernie, AOC.
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 Why not Bernie?
I'm ready for AOC.
The next generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, this is my camera moment.
Yeah.
2028. Oh. Mm-hmm.
Next one. Bell, we're going to start with you here. Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth.
Ugh. Do I have to?
You know, come on, we're Team Marco.
Team. Here's another one for you. Andy Bashir, Pete Buttigieg.
Wow.
I'm thinking Andy Bashir would be the better.
Pete Buttigieg.
Interesting. We're gonna go here. Sorry about this one too.
Oh, Lord.
Eric Adams versus Bob Menendez.
I'll go with a Cuban.
This is why we should be weighing the scales and kicking people out, okay? But I guess Eric Adams, I don't know.
And let's do this last one, and both of you can answer at the same time. Matt Gaetz versus Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I've got children.
Okay, I agree with him.
Awesome. All right, well, folks, that was...
What can you do? I mean, why do you pick the worst of the worst, Joe?
Want another one? Mike Johnson versus Jim Jordan. We had a lot of fun coming up with this. I'm going to be honest.
Jim Jordan.
Oh,
You go Jim Jordan.
Yes.
Bell, as we were going to end on unity. Come on.
Oh, okay.
all right, let's try one more then. Stephen Miller versus Kash Patel.
Cash Patel.
Jeez.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, we ended in a united way for Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Literally, together. So, folks, thank you for tuning in to Burn the Talking Points. This was a conversation on how to move the Democratic Party forward with DNC members, Bell and Robbie. Great conversation. I'm sure we'll hear back or hear from them again in the future, especially when we get closer to seeing some of the reforms that Chair Martin's been ushering through. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Burn the Talking Points. That was probably the most lively and animated conversation we had. Thank you to Bell. Thank you to Robbie, two of our DNC members. And the reason this conversation was so lively is because there's so many different views on how we can move the Democratic Party forward. But the thing that is clear is we are united in making sure that Democrats win, because when we're united and we elect Democrats, we can do good things for people. So I'm sure we're going to hear from them again, especially as we move through this election cycle and we start seeing the reforms that Chair Martin has put into place. Now, he was just elected at the beginning of February. It takes a while to move a massive ship, and he's already started putting a lot of those reforms in place. So looking forward to seeing both what Chair Martin has to offer and making sure we talk to our DNC members, Bell, Robbie, as well as Bob, Cheryl. And there's several others from Maryland who have been appointed as well. So really excited for this conversation. Again, drop your thoughts in the comment section. Let us know what you think of it. We'd love to hear from you, and we will talk to you soon.